The email subject line read, "Meet the father behind the genius." I opened it without thinking, expecting spam, maybe another alumni newsletter. Instead, it was a press release. Claire, my daughter, standing tall in a navy suit, smiling into the camera. Behind her, David Morrison. My husband. The man who vanished 23 years ago when I was 5 months pregnant. I dropped my phone. It hit the kitchen tile screen up. His name glowed like a sickness I couldn't scrub off. The article called him a quiet force of inspiration. Said he'd instilled resilience in his daughter from a young age. From a young age, he wasn't there when I delivered Claire alone at St. Mary's, wasn't there when she cried through her first fever, or when we ate buttered rice for a week because my second job didn't pay on time. He wasn't there when she asked me at 6, "Do I have a dad?" But now he was Father of the Year. Smiling next to my daughter like he earned it. Like the sleepless years belonged to him. I looked down. The edge of the countertop was digging into my hip. The toaster still warm. Half a slice of bread sat untouched, butter pooling on its surface. I had planned to call Claire that morning. Tell her I'd finally saved enough to pay off the last of her grad school loan. A surprise. Instead, I read her quote, "I wouldn't be who I am today without my dad." No mention of me. Not even a line. There were photos of them at dinner, her hand on his arm. Her eyes lit up soft. The way she used to look at me when she was 8 and I picked her up from school early after she got bullied for not having a lunchbox like the other girls. My hands were cold. But my chest burned. She had let him back in. And I hadn't even known. I reached for my phone again, staring at the screen like it might shift. Like this might be a nightmare I'd wake from if I blinked hard enough. But it didn't shift. He was real. Alive. Smiling. Claiming what he never earned. She gave him the credit. The speeches. The seat at her table. And me, I wasn't even invited. Would you stay quiet and let it go, or would you take back your story? Because that morning something in me cracked, and this time I didn't plan to stay invisible. The morning after the press release, I folded laundry like my hands belonged to someone else. Claire's old college sweatshirt was still in the basket, faded crimson letters peeling. She used to wear it during finals. Sleeves pushed up. Hair in a bun. Whispering formulas under her breath, pacing the living room while I reheated soup. Now it smelled like lavender detergent, and a past I wasn't sure I belonged in anymore. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the old fridge. I stood barefoot on the tiles, staring at the calendar pinned to the wall, the 12th of February. Claire's startup pitch. I had circled it in blue ink months ago. She hadn't called. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, white porcelain rim, chipped from the time Claire dropped it at 16, and cried because she thought I'd be mad. I wasn't. I'd been proud she cared. That mug had followed me through 2 apartments, 1 foreclosure, and 17 years of solo motherhood. The porch light blinked. Mail. I shuffled outside in my robe and slippers, arms crossed against the Flagstaff wind. The mailbox creaked. Inside, a water bill, a sympathy card from my friend Monica, her dog passed, and a manila envelope addressed in tight, unfamiliar handwriting. No return address. I slid it open with a butter knife. Inside were photos. Claire, David, at a bookstore, a cafe, laughing under twinkle lights. The kind of moments I'd always dreamed of sharing with her in her adulthood. My fingers trembled. I turned one photo over. Claire's handwriting. Dinner with Dad finally. Finally. As if she'd been waiting for him all this time. I closed the envelope and walked slowly back inside. The truth is, I had never stopped loving my daughter. Even when she forgot to return calls. Even when she canceled visits last minute with vague texts, swamped at work, Mom. Rain check. Even when she forgot my birthday 2 years in a row. I told myself it was normal. She was busy. She was building something. And I had raised her to be strong. Independent. Focused. But deep down I'd hoped we'd circle back. That once she had space, she'd come home, not to Flagstaff necessarily, but to me. We used to be close. I taught her how to ride a bike, how to sew a button, how to pay bills before the due date. I helped her write her first resume, printed 50 copies on cream cardstock and mailed them in manila envelopes because she insisted digital felt cold. Now she posted selfies with a father who'd never bought her a birthday card. That night, I went through old boxes in the hall closet. I needed something to hold on to. I found her report cards. Drawings from 3rd grade. The necklace she gave me on Mother's Day when she was 11. A cheap silver chain with a heart pendant that read, "Best Mom Ever." I pressed it to my chest. The ache swelled. In the back of the closet was a shoebox. Inside, a checkbook, printed tuition receipts, pay stubs from the university library, handwritten grocery lists, milk, eggs, ramen, Claire's science project stuff. Documentation. Proof. I'd kept it all. Not out of spite, but because I never wanted her to forget. Not just what we had survived, but how far we'd come. The next morning, Monica stopped by with coffee and a cinnamon roll. "You look like hell," she said, gently setting the cup on the table. "Talk to me." I told her everything. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and squeezed my hand. "He's manipulating her. She's smart, but she's human. She's 32, I whispered. And she forgot everything I did." Monica shook her head. "Number. She's just rewriting the story. But the truth has receipts." That evening, I opened my email. There was a folder marked Claire, archive I hadn't touched in years. I uploaded the tuition records, the hospital bills, the scanned copy of our old lease, the one with my name alone from when Claire was 4, and I finally got us into that duplex across town with a yard she could play in. I typed slowly. No venom. No dramatic speech. Just in case anyone asks what kind of father David was. I suggest this for context. Then I clicked send. Not to Claire, but to the press contact on the release. The one who had written that glowing piece. Afterward, I turned off the lights, curled up on the couch, and let the silence hold me. But I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her smile in those photos. The way she leaned into him. The way her eyes crinkled. She hadn't smiled at me like that in years. The question kept looping in my head like static on a radio. What if she chose him not out of confusion, but because she wanted to? The next morning, I logged onto Facebook. Claire had posted again. Another photo. Another caption. Proud to share this journey with my father. And still not a word about me. I closed the laptop. Saturday in the sunlight pooling on the kitchen tile. Let it warm my bare feet. I had given everything, and somehow I was the one erased. 3 days passed. No call, no message. Not even a like on my birthday post. Claire used to never forget. I cleaned the guest room, wiped down baseboards, rearranged throw pillows that hadn't been touched in weeks. Anything to keep my hands busy. Anything to keep from opening her page again. But late Friday night, I did, and there it was. A live stream. Claire's keynote speech at the Women AI conference in San Francisco. I clicked. She stood behind a sleek white podium in a navy jumpsuit, hair perfectly pinned, voice steady. I couldn't help it. My chest swelled. Pride was stubborn that way. "And I owe my drive," she said to the man who taught me how to see failure not as weakness but as a stepping stone. Applause. Camera panned. David, front row, standing, clapping, smiling. And then Claire said it. "Thank you, Dad. For everything." I turned off the screen. Saturday in the dark. The room felt cold even with the heat running. Was I imagining things, or was this really happening? I wasn't asking for credit. Not even applause, but she was rewriting the script and erasing me frame by frame. The next morning I went to the farmer's market like I always did. I passed our usual vendor, old Mr. Klein, who used to slip Claire extra strawberries when she was little. He smiled, held up a jar of homemade jam. "She's doing great, huh?" he said, pointing to his phone screen. "Just saw the article. Can't believe how much she looks like her father." I froze. He meant well. But the words landed like gravel in my stomach. She does, I said softly, taking the jar. Some things skip a generation, I guess. I paid in cash and left quickly. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with Monica. She took one look at my face and poured the wine without asking. She's gone public with him, I whispered. Monica's eyes narrowed. That fast, she's calling him her inspiration. Her rock. As if I stopped. Swallowed the burn behind my eyes. Have you talked to her directly? She asked gently. No, I said. I don't even know what I'd say. Monica leaned forward. Say what's real. Before the story becomes something you can't live with. I stared at my phone all night. No missed calls. No texts. Until Sunday. Claire messaged me. Hey mom, quick thing, don't freak out. David's staying in town for a while. I invited him to the awards dinner next month. Thought it'd be cool if we could all just be civil. Let's talk. I read it again. David. Not dad, not my father. Just David. And yet she wanted me to be civil, as if he'd missed a year or two. Not her entire childhood. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Monday morning the doorbell rang. It was FedEx. A large envelope. Claire's handwriting. Inside, an invitation. Claire Morrison, founder and CEO of Core Signal Labs, requests the presence of Mrs. Linda Morrison and Mr. David Morrison. One ticket, one table, no mention of mother, just my name. Like a formality. Like a stranger. I sat on the couch, the envelope in my lap. The silence was louder than any insult. That night I opened my laptop. I had to know. I searched her company's site. There it was. The Our Story page. A photo of Claire and David together, arms, links standing on the porch of some modern rental with ocean views. The caption reunited with the man who reminded me where I come from. Where she comes from, she came from me. From my ribs. My spine. My sacrifices. The next day, I drove out to the university library where I used to work. I hadn't been back in years. Not since I retired early, partially to help Claire with her startup costs. I found what I was looking for: the storage locker in the back. Inside, copies of the business license I co-signed to help her incorporate, the personal loan I took under my name to float her first prototype, the letter from the grant advisor I had secretly contacted recommending Claire for the Women in Tech Fund because I'd heard it existed and she hadn't. I scanned them all, sent them to myself. Proof. Not out of revenge. Out of necessity. Out of truth. That evening I finally replied to her message. We need to talk. In person, just you and me. She responded an hour later. Sure. Lunch tomorrow. We met at a quiet cafe near downtown. She wore a cashmere coat and that same navy blue she always did on stage. She looked polished. You look great, I said, meaning it. Thanks, Mom, she said. You too. We sat. She talked first. About the grant. The gala. The press. The momentum. I let her finish. Then I pulled out the folder. Her smile faded. What's this? Receipts, I said quietly. From the years you forgot. Her fingers twitched but didn't reach. I didn't need to raise my voice. Didn't need to guilt her. The silence did the work. Why now? She finally asked. Why bring this up? Because someone else is taking credit for a life I built, I said. And I won't let that happen, not even quietly. She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, he said, you never wanted him to be part of my life. My throat tightened. I wanted him to pay child support. I wanted him to show up, once. Her jaw clenched. I'm not trying to hurt you, Mom. You already did. We left the cafe in silence. As she opened her car door, she turned. I didn't know about the loan, or the grant letter, or... She paused. Do you hate me? I stared at her. Then said softly, I don't hate you, Claire. But I won't be erased. I stood outside the event hall, clutching my coat tighter. The wind off the desert made my knuckles ache, but I didn't care. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here because I had to see it with my own eyes. Claire's voice echoed from the speakers inside, clear and confident. We built core signal from a dream from late nights and bad coffee. My father always said, if you can't solve the problem, be the person who won't walk away from it. Laughter. Applause. I didn't have a ticket. She hadn't saved me a seat. But Monica knew someone on the catering staff. So I stood in the back, behind the curtain. Invisible. A waitress brushed past me carrying a tray of champagne. I caught the scent lemon zest, sparkling sugar. Claire hated champagne, said it made her tongue feel like sandpaper. Funny how things change. She was radiant on stage, blue silk dress. Hair swept up like I used to do for her high school dances, and David. David sat front and center. Tuxedo. Glass in hand. Looking proud. As if he'd earned a single second of this. When Claire finished, the MC took the mic. Let's give a warm round of applause to the man behind the brilliance, David Morrison. He stood. Claire extended her arms. They hugged. People cheered. I couldn't breathe. I slipped out the side door. The cold air hit my lungs like a slap. I leaned against the wall, palms flat against brick. It wasn't just the lie. It was how easy it had become for her to live in it. The Claire I raised who once cried over a B in calculus, who used to leave post-it notes on the fridge that said, I love you more than waffles, was gone. And in her place stood a woman who no longer saw me. The next day I didn't answer when she called. Or the next. I needed space. I needed to feel something that wasn't betrayal. So I took a box from the closet, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was the scrapbook I'd made for her 12th birthday. Every school photo, every ballet recital, every birthday card signed only Mom. There was no trace of David, because he had never been there. I flipped to the last page, Claire's acceptance letter to MIT. Tears blurred the words. At the bottom in her 12-year-old scrawl, for Mom, my forever team. So what changed? On Thursday, Monica came over with a tray of lemon bars and an eyebrow already raised. You're quiet, she said, setting them down. That worries me. I told her about the gala. The hug. The speech. The lies. She nodded slowly. You going to confront her? I already did. She just blinked it away. Monica poured tea. Then stopped blinking back. Tell the truth. Loudly. That night, I opened my laptop again. This time, I didn't just send documents. I wrote a letter. Not to Claire, but to the foundation. To the media rep who praised David. To the woman who had asked me at the event if I was part of the staff. I included tuition breakdown. Photos of Claire in our old apartment. A copy of the lease I co-signed for her first office. And a scan of the overdraft notice. I got the day I bought her that first laptop. Then I wrote. For 20 years I showed up. Not for credit, not for applause, but because I believed in my daughter. And I won't be erased from her story, especially not by a man who only remembered her once she made the news. I hesitated before clicking send. Then I hit it, closed the laptop, and exhaled. Friday morning the phone rang. Claire. I let it go to voicemail, then the messages started coming. Mom, what did you do? You didn't have to go public. David is furious. I stared at the screen. So was I. That afternoon there was a knock at the door. I opened it, Claire. Eyes red. Coat open. She stepped inside without waiting. You humiliated him. I raised an eyebrow. Did I? He said you leaked private stuff. Old records. Bank info. Why would you? Because he lied, I said. And you let him. She folded her arms. You could have talked to me. I did. You didn't hear me. She was quiet. Then he's trying, Mom. He regrets leaving. He wants a second chance. I laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. And what about me? Don't I get one? She looked at the floor. I walked to the living room and pulled out the scrapbook, handed it to her. She flipped through it in silence. Halfway through, her hands began to shake. I forgot some of these, she whispered. No, I said. You erased them. She sat down slowly. I just wanted to believe I had a whole family again. You did, I said. You had me. We didn't say much after that. She left without finishing her tea. And that night, for the first time in months, I slept without checking my phone. Saturday morning, I went to the bookstore downtown. The owner greeted me by name. I hadn't bought anything for myself in years. But that day, I picked up a journal. Hardcover, deep green. Smooth pages. I took it home. And on the first line, I wrote, I will no longer be edited out of my own life. The day after Claire left, I didn't get out of bed. Sunlight crept across the floor, soft and slow. Outside, wind rustled the pine trees that framed the backyard fence. Inside, the silence was thick like a blanket soaked in memory. My phone buzzed once. Then again. I didn't check. I didn't want more apologies that didn't sound like Claire. More justifications that echoed David. The truth sat heavy in my chest like a stone too smooth to grip. She hadn't defended me. She defended him. Even after seeing the scrapbook. Even after holding the pages with her own childhood handwriting. She still walked away. I made coffee sometime around noon. The pot sputtered. Steam curled in the air. The mug I reached for had a chip in it, Claire's old favorite. World's okayest mom. A joke gift when she was in college. She thought it was hilarious. I had kept it anyway. Today it felt cruel. I almost dropped it back into the sink. Instead, I poured the coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the empty chair across from me. It used to be hers. Now it felt like a stranger's. Around 3 p.m. I stepped outside. The wind had picked up. The mail was stuffed in the box. I brought it and flipped through mechanically. Bills, a charity appeal, an envelope with no return address. Inside, another photo. Claire. David. Smiling under a coarse signal banner, arms wrapped tight. At the bottom, a quote from a new article. David Morrison, the father who rebuilt a bridge most thought had burned. I sank onto the couch. I had no more tears left, only stillness. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The air smelled like old wood and dust. An owl hooted in the distance. I thought about the first time I held Claire. She was pink, wrinkled, furious. And perfect. David had already left by then. I remember thinking, I will never let her feel unwanted. Now, somehow, I was the one she didn't want. I didn't sleep much. Memories came in flashes. Tying her shoes. Holding her hand on the first day of kindergarten. Staying up all night when she had the flu. None of that was visible in a press release. None of that earned standing ovations. The next morning, I stared at the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at me wasn't angry. She looked hollow. Like someone halfway erased. I opened Claire's baby box. Inside, her hospital bracelet, the sonogram, a card that read, Welcome Claire Elizabeth, 6 pounds 8 ounces. I held the bracelet between my fingers. So small. I'd given her everything. My time, my money, my name. And somehow I wasn't enough. Around 11 a.m. Monica called. Still alive, she asked, voice light but careful. Barely, I said. She came over an hour later with a tray of pasta and her old dog Rufus in tow. We didn't talk for a while. Just ate in silence. The kind only old friends can sit in. Then she said, what if she never comes back? I stared at her. I don't know, I whispered. Maybe I just have to accept it. You don't, she said firmly. You can grieve it. But you don't have to accept being rewritten. That night I wrote in my journal again. Asterisk. It's not about punishment, it's about memory. If I don't protect mine, no one else will. Asterisk. The next day a package arrived. No sender, no note. Inside, a copy of a tech magazine. Cover story, Claire Morrison and her comeback father. On page 5, a quote that gutted me. I've always felt like I was chasing someone else's version of success. With Dad, I feel like I finally found my own. I folded the page, pressed it flat, then I stood up. put on real clothes, brushed my hair, and went to the bank. It was time to shift something. Quietly, legally. I opened a new account. Moved funds. Reviewed my will. I didn't erase Claire, but I created a trust with conditions. A future that could still be protected. But not abused. Not erased. Not anymore. Monday morning began with the sound of a truck reversing outside my window. Beep. 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 I pulled the curtain. The neighbors across the street were having their roof redone. Young couple, 2 kids still paying off their minivan. The woman waved at me. I didn't wave back. Instead, I stood with my coffee watching her lift her toddler onto her hip and balance a bag of groceries in the other hand. I remembered that weight, that one-arm carry, that exhaustion. No one ever clapped for it. No one ever wrote a press release. After breakfast, I sat down at my desk, the one I used to grade student papers at before I left the university. Now it held a notepad, a half-dead succulent, and an envelope from the law office I'd been avoiding. I opened it. Inside was my original will, unchanged since Claire's college graduation. Everything to her. Every cent. It had felt right then. Now it felt naive. I dialed the attorney's number. Yes, I'd like to schedule an appointment to revise my estate plan, I said. Pause. Yes. Everything. That afternoon, I drove downtown. The lawyer, Miss Hensley, was younger than I expected. Sharp, kind. No small talk. She listened as I explained I wasn't disowning my daughter, but I needed to protect what was built with my hands, my time, my life. She nodded. Conditional trust, she said. You name a cause or recipient. Claire can receive support but not access. No direct control. I breathed. For the first time in weeks I felt anchored. We spent an hour crafting clauses. Education support for any future child Claire might have. Healthcare contingency. A charitable donation in my name for single mothers returning to school. My name. Not his. I left the office with a copy of the draft and a strange sense of calm. The sun hit the sidewalk in long gold streaks. I stopped by the corner bookstore and bought myself a hardcover journal. Deep burgundy. Thick pages. I was rewriting more than my will. I was rewriting my part in this story. At home, I made a list. Update the bank accounts. Cancel automatic payments linked to Claire's business. Collect all past correspondence with David. Digitize all tax documents from the last 20 years. Review old emails, especially the one from the Women in STEM Foundation. Step by step. Not revenge. Just reality. That evening, Claire called. I let it ring. Then picked up. Her voice was hesitant. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. I stayed silent. I saw your name listed in that grant acknowledgement. I didn't realize. You didn't ask, I said calmly. I thought, Dad, you chose to believe him. She was quiet. Then I want to fix things. You can't rewrite 20 years in a press conference, Claire. I know. I waited. Can we meet? She asked. Properly. Just us. We met at the old diner off Main. The same one where I used to take her after choir practice. She was already there sitting in a booth. Hair in a low bun. Eyes tired. I'm not proud of how I handled it, she said once I sat. I didn't interrupt. I got caught up. The praise the platform, he fit the narrative. Narratives aren't facts, I said. They're choices. Her eyes filled. I didn't forget you. I didn't know how to explain you to them. That hurt more than anything. I never needed to be explained, Claire. I needed to be respected. She reached into her bag, pulled out a worn envelope. I found these last week. Letters I wrote you from college. Never sent. She pushed them across the table. I didn't open them. Not yet. Are you here because you miss me? I asked quietly, or because the truth is finally inconvenient? She looked like she might break. I miss you, she said. But I also messed up. I know that. I stood, left a 20 on the table, and walked out. At home, I sat on the couch and stared at the letters. I didn't read them that night. Some wounds don't scab fast just because someone says sorry. The next day, the lawyer called. Your updated estate documents are ready. Want to come sign? I paused, then said yes. At the signing, she asked one final question. Do you want to name a secondary beneficiary? In case Claire doesn't meet the trust terms, I thought of Monica. Of the women I'd met in support groups. Of single moms who would never get thanked in a magazine. Yes, I said. I want a scholarship in my name. For daughters raised by mothers who never got credit. That weekend, I bought new towels, new dishware, a new phone. Not to replace the old things, but to stop carrying the versions of myself who waited too long to be seen. Sunday evening, Claire called again. I'm not giving him another quote, she said. No more press. No more stories. Good, I said. He's had enough chapters. She laughed softly. It didn't fix anything, but it was a start. When someone tries to rewrite your story, would you correct it quietly or walk away? I didn't plan on running into David again. But life has a cruel sense of timing. It was a Wednesday. Late morning. I just left the notary's office after finalizing my trust documents. The lawyer handed me the folder with a small nod. Congratulations, she said. You've protected everything that matters. I smiled, tucked the folder into my purse, walked into the Arizona sun, and there he was. David, leaning against a silver rental car, sunglasses pushed into his hair like he belonged on a film set not in my life. Linda, he said, all smooth teeth and charm. Heard you've been busy. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, just said, You're not supposed to be here. He smirked. Claire told me you're getting territorial. I stepped closer slowly. The word you're looking for is protective. Something you wouldn't understand. His face hardened. The mask slipped. She's my daughter too. No, I said. She was your project. Until she became profitable. He moved like he might say more, but I walked past him and got in my car. I didn't slam the door. Didn't raise my voice. Just drove away calm. Certain. Because he didn't know what I'd already done. Back home, I opened my laptop. Opened the folder marked Legacy Plan. Inside, updated will. Conditional trust. The new deed transfer for my house. A letter I wrote to Claire unread, but they're ready. I added one more file. A statement of record. Detailed, dated. Witnessed. Everything David had failed to provide over 23 years. Everything I'd covered. And everything he'd tried to claim. That Friday, the gala photos dropped. Claire and David again, side by side. But this time I noticed something different. The caption didn't call him the man behind her. It called him a father seeking reconnection. Softened, distanced. No longer a hero, just a figure in the background. I smiled. The media contact I'd written 2 weeks ago had clearly done more than listen. Then came the email. Subject request for clarification, Core Signal Public Records. They'd received documentation copies of my loans. Claire's tuition records, co-signed business filings. Would I be willing to verify them? I didn't hesitate. Yes. All of it. That same evening, Claire called. Mom, she said. I got asked to update our press kit. I waited. They want to include you. A pause. Then, and I said yes. She invited me to dinner the following week. A small gathering, just me, her business partner, and the woman who'd helped her get that first grant. I wore the pearl earrings Claire gave me on her college graduation day, took a cab, brought nothing but a clear mind and a straighter spine than I'd had in months. The restaurant was downtown. Soft lighting, exposed brick. Cloth napkins that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Claire stood when I walked in. She hugged me. Not awkward. Not stiff. Real. Dinner was pleasant. No mention of David, no digging into the past. Just laughter, plans. Conversations about future hires, community grants, internships for girls in rural schools. She was changing slowly. Still herself, but something softer. She didn't apologize again. She didn't have to. Her actions had finally started speaking. After dessert, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "I read the letter," she said. I looked at her. "The one in the estate folder," she added. So she had seen it. "I didn't think I needed to write it," I said. But I didn't want to leave without saying everything I meant. Claire's voice cracked. "You didn't leave Mom." "I did. And I'm sorry." That night I got home and poured a glass of wine. Saturday on the back porch. Watched the sky shift from lavender to charcoal. The wind was light, the air smelled like summer, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was fighting to prove I existed. I had carved out space for myself again. Not by screaming, not by begging, but by documenting. By protecting. By choosing quiet strength over noise. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. From David. Inside, a copy of a cease and desist notice. He claimed I had defamed him by submitting false materials to press and legal bodies. I laughed. Then dropped it into the shredder. No response needed. The paper would vanish, but my records wouldn't. That weekend, Claire sent me a screenshot. Her company's About Us page. Updated. My name was there. Not in big letters. Not in flashing lights. But it said Core Signal was built on the resilience of women who refused to disappear. One of them raised me. I didn't cry. But I did close the laptop gently and pressed my hand against the cover. That was enough. The email came on a Tuesday. Subject: Notice of Inquiry, Misrepresentation of Parental Role in Grant Application. I read it twice. Then once more slowly. The foundation that had awarded Claire the $1.5 million innovation grant had launched a review. Not of her, but of David. They had received multiple supporting documents from a verified source, me, and had concerns regarding the veracity of claimed paternal financial and educational involvement. My hands didn't tremble. Not this time. The next morning, I was called to give a sworn statement via video call. The legal rep was courteous, professional. She asked me to confirm that David Morrison had no verifiable financial contributions to Claire's education, that I was the sole parent listed on all major applications, loans, and financial aid documents, that I had not come forward publicly until prompted by the misrepresentation in question. I answered each with clarity. No anger. Just truth. By Friday, the fallout began. A reporter from a mid-tier tech journal emailed asking for a quote. I declined. No comment, I wrote. The records speak for themselves. I didn't need a spotlight. I'd already reclaimed the stage where it mattered, my own life. Claire called that night. "He's furious," she said. "I'm not surprised. He said you ruined his reputation." "No," I said gently. "He did that. I just stopped protecting it for him." She was silent. Then she whispered, "Thank you." The next week, I attended the community fundraiser Claire's company hosted. She asked me to come. Personally. Not as a guest, she said. As a name on the program. The small event center was packed: investors, mentors, students. When Claire stepped up to the podium, she looked right at me. For years, she said, I believed success meant polishing the story so it shined. She paused. But that's not success. That's erasure. She held up a folded letter, the one I'd written. This woman, she continued, built me. Quietly. Fiercely. Completely. Then she stepped back and the applause filled the room. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. David didn't show up that night. In fact, no one had seen him in weeks. Rumors said he'd left town, he'd deactivated his social media, stopped answering calls. But one thing hadn't disappeared: the debts. Turns out David had exaggerated more than just his relationship with Claire. He had pending tax issues. Unpaid business loans from his last failed venture in California. And now, with press attention digging deeper, banks were asking questions. 3 weeks later, a court notice arrived in my mailbox. David had been subpoenaed. Not by me. By the grant board and a separate legal entity. I wasn't asked to testify again. They already had everything they needed. I spent that weekend cleaning out the guest room. Washed the curtains. Vacuumed the corners. It wasn't for Claire. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. That room used to be full of waiting for apologies, for visits, for recognition. Now it was going to be my art space. I bought paintbrushes, a folding table, a corkboard. I hadn't created anything in decades. But it was time. Claire visited the next Sunday. She brought hydrangeas. They used to be my favorite before they reminded me of the apology bouquet David sent when Claire was 2. Now they meant something else. She stayed for lunch. Helped me chop vegetables. Set the table without asking. Didn't check her phone once. We talked about little things, and for once the space between us wasn't filled with guilt, it was filled with breath. Before she left, she handed me a thick envelope. Inside a formal amendment to her company's founding documents. She had legally added my name as co-founder. It doesn't change equity, she said. But it corrects the record. I looked at her. Really looked, and said thank you. Not for the paperwork, but for finally seeing me. A few days later, Monica and I had tea on my porch. She did it, huh? Monica said, smiling. She did, I said. Then added, and so did I. By the end of the month, the foundation publicly acknowledged the error. David Morrison was removed from all affiliated materials. Claire's profile remained, but with an updated narrative. One line stood out, raised by a single mother who defied silence. I stood in line at the post office one morning holding a parcel for Claire. A woman behind me tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you the Linda Morrison?" I turned, startled. She smiled. "I saw your daughter speak. The way she talked about you, it stayed with me." I nodded. Heart full. Some victories aren't loud, but they echo. The house is quiet again. But not the kind of quiet that aches. Not the kind that reminds you who stopped calling, or what chair sits empty. This quiet is mine. It belongs to the version of me that no longer waits for apologies to feel whole. I wake up early now. No alarm. No rush. The light through the curtains is soft golden. It hits the kitchen tile at the same angle every morning. And I let it touch me. I let the warmth settle on my skin like a memory I no longer fear. I make coffee in silence. No one rushing in. No one yelling for a missing phone charger. Just the sound of the drip, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the small creak in the floor near the pantry I've never fixed. There's comfort in knowing some things stay the same. The mug I choose today is plain white with a tiny chip near the handle. It used to be Claire's favorite. She once called it the lucky cup during finals week. I wrap both hands around it, sip slowly, and watch the sky shift outside. There's no pressure to prove anything. No need to post, explain, or justify how I start my day. That in itself is a small revolution. I've repainted the guest room. The one I used to clean and keep just in case she needed to come home. It's no longer a shrine to waiting. Now it holds brushes. Canvas. A folding table I bought secondhand from a woman who said I used to be an artist too. The room smells like paint and lavender. Like something new growing from something old. Sometimes I sit in there and don't paint at all. I just breathe. Let the stillness settle. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet knowing that you survived and chose peace anyway. Claire visits now, not often, but not out of guilt either. And that makes all the difference. She brings grocery store flowers and a new respect I can feel in the way she listens. She asks about my garden. My new projects. She doesn't call them hobbies like they're trivial. She tells me about her team, her stress, her slow steps toward better boundaries. We sit on the porch, sometimes wrapped in sweaters, mugs warm in our hands, and we just let the silence speak for us. There's a tenderness to the way she looks at me now. Less like someone she came from and more like someone she's proud of. She doesn't call him much anymore. If she does, I don't ask. Because that's her burden now, not mine. And I've carried enough. I finished my journal last week, every page filled. Some days I only wrote a sentence. Some days I poured out 5 pages without breathing. The last line says, I am no longer afraid of being forgotten. I am full of the life I lived. I closed the book gently, ran my hand across the cover, and cried not from grief but from relief. I joined a women's group at the public library. Thursdays. Back room. No pressure to talk, unless you want to. We sit in a circle of folding chairs. Some sip tea, some bring knitting, some just come to breathe. One woman, Carla, told us, my husband died 5 years ago, but the silence only started feeling like mine last year. Another, Lisa, said, I raised 3 boys. One calls, one visits, one blocked me. But I still bake banana bread every Sunday because I'm still their mother even when they forget. I said nothing that day. But I held Lisa's hand on the way out. A few months ago, Claire launched a mentorship initiative. For young women in tech, especially those from single-parent households, she named it the Morrison Circle. She asked me to attend the opening. I didn't. But I wrote a letter she read aloud. To the girls who've been told their worth is borrowed from someone else, remember this: you carry your own weight. You deserve your own name. And you are never required to shrink so someone else can shine. She told me afterward that several girls cried. One said, that sounded like something my mom would have said if she hadn't given up. That stayed with me for weeks. Because I didn't give up. And now I get to know what it feels like to be remembered, not because I demanded it, but because I stayed long enough to be undeniable. I updated my will again. Summit Trust. Summit Causes. But I added one more clause: a donation to the Flagstaff Library's Women's Literacy Program. It will carry my name, not David's. Because the stories that shaped my life deserve space to grow new ones. I added a letter too. For Claire. You won't understand all of this now, maybe never. But if you ever feel lost in someone else's version of your life, come back to these pages. Come back to the woman who stayed. This morning, I walked to the mailbox barefoot. The sidewalk was warm from the sun. The pine trees whispered in the breeze. Inside the box was a small envelope. No stamp. No return address. Claire's handwriting. Inside, one photo. Us in the kitchen. She was 8. I was tired. Flour on my face. We were laughing. On the back she'd written, you made joy out of nothing. I remember now. I sat on the porch for a long time. Birds chirped. Wind danced through the trees. And I let myself smile, not because everything was fixed, but because I was free. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from quiet? Have you ever held on not for recognition, but because someone needed you strong? If this story touched something in you, tell me below. You are not alone. And you never were. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more real stories of justice, healing, and empowerment after 40. Share your journey, someone needs to hear it. Every ending can be a new beginning.